Coming up on the program today, over 2,000 people killed in a 7.8 magnitude earthquake in the border between Turkey and Syria. It was felt in about 5 neighboring countries. Global response to the quake in Turkey and in Syria as countries prepare to send aid to the countries. And later on, NATO allies preparing to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine as fear rises over a major Russian offensive there later this month. Welcome, everyone. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Begin with updates from the 7.8 magnitude earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria this morning, as well as the follow-up 7.5 magnitude tremor. A death toll has risen beyond 2,000 now. Rescue workers still speeding against the clock to get to as many survivors as possible. These are videos from earlier in the day, the quake happening overnight while people were sleeping. Buildings are down, at least 900 of them, especially in Turkey. Rescue workers have been mobilized from across the country, appearing with ambulances, trying to reach as many people as possible still stuck under the rubble. They will be getting updates on that a bit later. But that quake, of course, felt in as many countries as possible, even as far as Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we'll hear from later, says he is also organizing aid to send to Syria. We'll have more on this, of course, but it's a race against time to find those survivors in Syria and in Turkey. Joining me now is geopolitical analyst Shahzada Shahzada Abbas. He is in Ankara. Shahzada, thank you for joining me on the program today. And I know that this quake, as far as it reaches at least 5 countries altogether, Lebanon, Cyprus, just a few of those countries mentioned, which we'll hear in the report later on, but not all parts of Turkey, right?
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. Today's earthquake was the most shocking event the Turkish people have ever experienced last 84 years, as said by the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Not all the Turkey, these are only 10 cities in the southern eastern part of the Turkey. The 10 cities were most damaged by the earthquake. You know that the first earthquake, the magnitude was 7.8. And it was traveling with the speed of 17.9 kilometers, and it hit the southern eastern province of Gaziantep. So, and it gradually spread to other cities too, including Malatya, Hatay, and Kahramanmaraş, and Malatya, and these cities they're highly damaged. So the reports here are very shocking. As we have seen, the people are desperate, they're outside their houses and waiting for the help. The Turkish government so far has mobilized everything in its capacity, to help to boost the rescue operations in these cities. All the cities have been covered and the aid is being sent. And the plus is the most important problem here. The trouble for the rescue operation is the weather. The weather is very cold here and it's snowing in most cities of the southern eastern Turkey. So it's creating a huge troubles for the rescue workers to continue their rescue operations. But the Turkish government is doing everything in its capacity. And the friendly countries like Azerbaijan, Israel, Pakistan, and the European Union and NATO, America, UK, they all have pledged to send the aid operations to rescuers to the country to boost up the rescue operations in the country. So far, the situation is very tense, as we know that as per the reports by both the Turkish Disaster Management Agency, known as AFAD, more than 1,500 people have so far died, and more than 5,000 people they are injured, and the rescue operations is still continuing in these cities, and it's expected that toll might increase as the rescue operations will go on. So it's very pathetic. The situation is very pathetic.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the death toll, as we have reported, is over 2,000. It's a major quake that's happened in Turkey, and the fact that it's reached all of these other countries makes it even more serious. But tell us, is this area prone to earthquakes? I mean, what are we understanding about where exactly it hit?
Yeah, like Turkey has been very prone to the earthquakes for a very long time. Throughout history, we have seen in 1939 the Erzincan earthquake, which claimed 33,000 lives, in 1939. And the Turkish president today mentioned this. And another earthquake we have seen, the Istanbul earthquake, which occurred in 1999, that claimed more than 17,000 lives. But this time, it was worse. It has damaged more than 10 cities in Turkey, in southern eastern Turkey. And these cities are not just small cities. These are the big cities in terms of population. And these are the most advanced urban centers in the southern eastern part of Turkey. So the damage is very high. And we have seen more than 2,000 buildings have collapsed in these cities, according to reports. The reports are conflict because nobody's talking openly because most of the roads are blocked towards these cities, according to few reports. But it has not been clarified yet. But the rescue operations are going on as per the reports and as per the tweets and reports by the AFAD, the Turkish Disaster Management Agency. Yeah, the Turkey is the most earthquake-prone country, in the whole Middle East. It's mainly affected by the earthquakes many times in history.
Yes, and I know that there have also been earthquakes in Syria as well. But, you look at these two countries, Turkey and Syria, generally they don't enjoy really good relations with their neighbors. I mean, Syria has been fighting a war there for years, I think since 2010, with President Bashar al-Assad trying to ward off Western influence, especially with the NATO allies who once were fighting Syrian forces, who were responding to protests that had earlier happened as people tried to topple the government. And then Turkey, which hasn't had the support of the European Union, for a few years now, even though it has tried to become a member of the European Union. So how exactly are these, the international aid coming to Turkey? On what basis? And, is anyone talking about, where Turkey stands with the EU and where Syria also stands with the rest of the world?
It's very complicated to say, to say something clear about this issue. Yeah, but mostly the rebel-controlled areas in Syria are mostly affected by the earthquake. As we have seen, reports in Idlib, the white helmets, the Syrian Civil Defense Force, they are continuing to continue the rescue operation, and they have asked the international assistance. So the EU officials have recently said they will send aid to the Syria in order to boost up the rescue operations. But so far we have seen the Turkey which has been the largest supporter of the opposition in Syria, especially the most supported, it's a lifeline for the rebel control areas. But now it's also suffering from the damages caused by the earthquake. So it seems it might be difficult for Turkey to boost up the operations in Idlib at the same time and as well as in Turkey. But they're trying their best. And the US boosted the EU has promised the assistance for both Syria and Turkey. But the Turkey is a transit country, so it needs the help of the Turkey in order to provide those assistance to the Syrian damage, to the affected Syrian earthquake-affected regions in Syria, especially which has been mostly affected. And plus, most of the government areas also affected, including Aleppo, Latakia, and Tartus. And there have been shortage of food, there is shelters, and plus, that there are many millions of internal displaced people still living due to the ongoing civil war in Syria. And this earthquake has caused another trouble for both government and the opposition who are controlling those areas. So it seems that the situation is very tense. And so this is the real time, when the EU and America and all Western nations should boost up their support and by providing assistance to these affected areas and to the affected people in order to reduce the suffering of the people, which have been suffering from this Syrian civil war for a long time. So the Turkey's position is very clear. Turkey is going to help, definitely, because a transit country, it has already sent, there have been reports Turkey have sent a few of the rescue rescue personnel to the Idlib region. But the report is not clear yet.
Yes, indeed. The report's really not clear. But just to remind our viewers again, it was a 7.8 magnitude quake struck near Gaziantep in the early hours of today while people were still asleep. It was followed by a 7.5 magnitude tremor that hit at 1:30 local time. Disaster agency says at least 1,500 people were died from the first hit of the quake, and then more than 5,000 people were found wounded. Then in Syria, authorities have been reported 810 people dead, more than 2,000 injured. I just want to remind people exactly what we're talking about, the magnitude and how far-reaching this quake was. I'll put a pause in our conversation, Susanna, to take this report, which gives us a better idea of what happened earlier today in Turkey and in Syria.
The 7.8 magnitude quake struck near Gaziantep in the early hours of Monday. It was followed by a 7.5 magnitude tremor hours later, around 1:30 local time. Officials said it was not an aftershock. The quake was felt by millions across Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Cyprus, even Israel. But the epicenter was near the Turkish city of Gaziantep. Authorities declared a state of emergency and called on residents not to use mobile phones, especially those within the areas of the quake. They've also called for people to allow rescuers coordinate operations. And as rescue teams scrambled on with the search and rescue, and where possible recovery, rescue aircraft have been sent to the affected areas. Residents in the Turkish city of Diyarbakir describe what they've witnessed.
I was sleeping when my wife suddenly woke me up. The quake was very severe, very scary. We were hearing sounds from all over the place. It took almost 2 minutes until the shaking stopped. There are people still trapped under rubble. I have a friend living at this apartment. His children were rescued from the top floor, but only his daughter broke an arm. We'll see what happened to those living on the ground floor. May God give us a speedy recovery.
Hundreds of people are still believed to be trapped under the rubble. Authorities say nearly 900 buildings were destroyed in Turkey's Gaziantep and Kahramanmaraş provinces, placing the total number of collapsed buildings at 1,718, with more than 5,300 people wounded. Meanwhile, as Syria's President Bashar Assad chaired an emergency meeting early this morning, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte announced a Dutch search and rescue team will join the hunt for survivors in Turkey and Syria. In a tweet, he also shared his condolences to the President of Turkey. On his part, Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis says Greece will also be mobilizing its resources to help assist the affected areas immediately. Leaders of Serbia and Sweden have also promised to send help to the region. The earthquake also rocked neighboring Syria, Lebanon, and Cyprus.
Just to give us an idea, a representation of what happened today, over 2,000 people dead in the earthquake, the 7.8 magnitude earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria this morning. Over 2,000 people dead, 2,300 at the last count, more than 810 of them in Syria. Much earlier, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the country is preparing to extend aid to Turkey, to Syrian victims as well. He said that he's ordered to send, at the request of the Turkish government, rescue teams and medical aid, since the request was also received to do this for many victims of the earthquake in Syria. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also instructed authorities to do this as well. He has not elaborated on who made the request regarding Syria, but he did plant a tree earlier to commemorate the 7 victims of a Palestinian shooting attack outside a synagogue in the Nevi Yaakov settlement on the outskirts of Jerusalem on January 27. Well, also planning aid for Turkey and Syria is Germany, which said it will immediately activate all possible aid for the victims of the deadly earthquake, and this will be in close coordination with Turkish authorities. According to the Interior Ministry spokesperson, Maximilian Kau, speaking to reporters earlier today, he said the government's technical aid agency is capable of supplying camps with emergency shelters and water purification systems, adding that the government's technical aid agency is preparing to send power generators, tents and blankets to the region. And the western German town of Chornevost, workers for aid agency Meteor were packing dressing materials, hospital monitors and oxygen concentrators. They say they know that of at least 2 hospitals which were affected by the quake. Death toll, of course, risen to over 2,003, with some 2,824 buildings already destroyed by the earthquake. Italian firefighters are also packing equipment ahead of flight to Turkey following the major earthquake and the aftershocks in southern Turkey and in northwest Syria. Italy plans to send 40 firefighters from the USAR, the Urban Search and Rescue Team, specialized in rescue operations among the rubble, with technical experts in damage assessment and analysis. Firefighters will also deploy 12 experts of the task, that's a technical assistance and support team, to provide support in the coordination and operational management of complex emergencies in foreign countries. Geopolitical analyst Shahzada Abbas is still with us. Shahzada, thank you for your patience. And we just had to get all of that out there. Of course, these aids that are coming to Turkey at this time, with about 10 cities, as you mentioned, already affected by this, how exactly is the aid supposed to reach them? And how possible will it be, for the rescue teams to get to people who are still trapped under rubble, especially in the other cities that are not really affected by this earthquake?
Yeah, definitely, the rescue operation is going to be very difficult for the Turkish government, to manage, because we know that. But the Turkish government have well institutions they call it Kızılay, Red Crescent, and the Turkish Disaster Management Agency, AFAD, and other civil societies, small groups, which are going to continue, to take the responsibility of this whole rescue operations. About the aid, definitely the Turkish president, in the morning, in his address, he said, we have to mobilize. It's time for the unity, not to talk against each other, and we have to be united in order to boost up the rescue operations in the earthquake affected cities. And the 10 cities, they're not small cities, they're all big cities, in terms of population. And definitely, the rescue operations is going to be very difficult for the Turkish Disaster Management Agency and other specialized rescuers. But the international aid is coming. The Russian president said, we are ready to cooperate with Turkey, by sending the personals, and plus, the military, the Turkish military has always been at the forefront in the rescue operations. So there is possibility that the Turkish government might call the army to boost up the rescue operations. And there have been reports from the friendly country like Pakistan. The Pakistani government has already dispatched this rescue army personnel towards Turkey, in order to boost up the rescue operations in these affected cities. And plus, there have been multiple reports about the blockade of the major highways within cities, and it seems it might be difficult and as I already mentioned earlier, the weather conditions here are freezing. It's very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for the rescuers to continue the rescue operations in these cities, because the temperatures are below zero, and it's continuously snowing in southern eastern part. And I'm living in Ankara, and here it's constantly snowing here from last 3 days. So looking at the weather condition, it seems that the rescue operation is going to be very hard for the Turkish government to boost up.
Yeah, and the weather, of course, is something we also need to consider, as well as communication lines. Shahzada, thank you so much. You've been of invaluable help to us, helping us to understand the area and, of course, the quake that's happened, how the government is moving with its rescue efforts, as well as other countries. Thank you for joining us on the program, and do stay safe.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
We'll have more on the earthquake that happened earlier today in Turkey and in Syria. Over 2,000 people dead. Stay with us for more updates. Welcome back to the program. We're staying with our lead story today, which is the 7.8 magnitude earthquake that struck Turkey in the early hours of this morning while people were still sleeping. Rescue workers still trying to get to those people under the rubble. 10 cities in Turkey affected. Cities in Syria as well, where over 800 people have been declared dead. Rescue workers are trying to get to those still under the rubble. It has been a race against time to find survivors. One NGO is actually on the ground as we speak. They have been working to getting to survivors as many as possible. They're the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development and Emergency Program. The manager, Hombeline Dulaire, says she fears a cold weather in the region will make rescue difficult, and it will will make rescue efforts more difficult and will also increase the death toll. Remember, we're already at over 2,300. It's not clear how much damage has been done by the second quake, the 7.5 tremor that followed the 7.8, which felt like the first one across the region, and endangered rescuers struggling to pull casualties from the rubble, many of them using bare hands just to remove masonry at least.
It's a race against time because the weather is so cold. It's been raining, it's been snowing. There've been heavy rains, heavy winds, and the temperatures are below zero. So we need to find people as soon as possible because people are stuck under rubbles. But they're also the cold is going to also affect that, and we fear that this is going to increase the death toll as well. It's a terrible situation on the ground. So it's a humanitarian disaster with devastating impacts on populations that were already extremely vulnerable. We've heard from partners that they're still the rescue teams are still trying to find people under the rubbles. They've been also helping and supporting with the initial response with the rescue teams. They've been also assessing the needs to have an idea of the extent of the damages. Food, water are definitely quite needed, but also shelters, of course, especially for those who have lost their homes. Medicines as well, as people and rescue teams are short on medicine to provide to people who have been injured. But also non-food items and winterization items like blankets, heating materials, because the weather is extremely cold at the moment. People have been waiting outside since 4 a.m. this morning. It's been snowing, it's been raining, temperatures have been below zero. So this is also quite needed.
Can't imagine the conditions that these rescue workers are working to get people out of the rubble, and those who have survived the quake are still stuck under the rubble waiting to be rescued. Well, the World Health Organization says it expects a significant increase in the death toll. There have been aftershocks. Just one before the program started, there was an aftershock that hit while rescuers were under the rubble. There have been two aftershocks since the earthquake. One reporter on the ground ran in panic towards Malatya, southeast of Turkey. So far, over 2,000 people have died, from this. Many more, unfortunately, expected because of, the cold weather conditions already there. We've heard our guest earlier talk about how cold it is, how it's been snowing in Ankara. So imagine the conditions that are already existing where these people are. The World Health Organization's Regional Emergency Director for the Eastern Mediterranean, Rick Brennan, says the agency is exploring options to send mobile medical teams to the area, but the rescue efforts are being complicated by the aftershocks.
The numbers are continuing to change, but we know that in southern Turkey, over 1,000 people have been reported dead. thousands others injured. Official numbers from northern Syria indicate around 325 people killed, over 1,000 injured. In the area of northwest Syria, we understand from health workers there that over 120 people. There's been a significant decline in funding for humanitarian operations right across Syria, and that's already complicated our humanitarian response. When you think of what's going on in Syria right now, a long-standing humanitarian crisis, still getting over COVID, a huge economic crisis, cholera outbreak, and now this additional crisis in the context of a harsh winter and major fuel shortages. It's almost like the perfect storm, and the convergence of all these crises is leading to enormous suffering.
And that was Regional Emergency Director for the Eastern Mediterranean, Rick Brennan, with the WHO. Over 2,300 people killed. Just a minute ago, the U.S. President Joe Biden sent out a tweet regarding the earthquake in Turkey and in Syria, saying, "I am deeply saddened by the loss of life and devastation caused by the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. I've directed my team to continue to closely monitor the situation in coordination with Turkey and provide any and all needed assistance." He's one of two presidents who has responded in the last hour. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also reacting to the earthquake. He's offered his condolences. That's President Zelensky offered his condolences to the Turkish President Recep Erdogan, as well as to the victims and their families. He says Ukraine is ready to provide assistance to overcome the consequences of the disaster. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now. Maria, we just read President Biden's tweet about, how he feels about this quake that has happened in Syria. Countries are rallying support right now to the country, to Turkey, as well as to Syria. What exactly is the U.S. government promising? What have you heard apart from President Biden's tweet, which just very much just talks about his condolences, but hasn't really offered the support necessary?
Yes, well, the tweet is something obviously that he just came out with, but earlier today he did instruct the USAID to work with those NGOs on the ground in the region that the U.S. has direct support with or directly supports. And so he is galvanizing those support efforts, especially as it relates to organizations we already have in the region that can quickly get to Syria and Turkey to address that. We also know that Secretary Blinken also has put out information and is working as a State Department to see how they can further support the region. Last night, the security advisor for the White House, Jake Sullivan, also came out and provided a sense of condolence and also that the U.S. would be ready to support when that was necessary. So there has been spotty, information coming from the U.S. And I do know that there was probably more action being put in place before actual tweets and also additional kind of commentary around the condolences and the actual support they would be providing.
Yes, it is quite understandable. The U.S. is miles away from Turkey, also miles away from Syria. And most of the analysts who've commented on this have said that, this complicates the already devastating situation in Syria, which has been going through years of war. And where this quake happened actually is, it happened in one of the places where, the suffering could even be compounded even further. Remember the Arab Spring uprising in 2010, the U.S. government and its strained relations with Syria, and in some instances, its strained relations with Turkey. So is the government really able to go past all of that, with its support? And then it's also supporting Ukraine in the war as well. You have to think about that, don't you?
You're exactly correct. I mean, the U.S. is obviously going to do whatever they can, but we're in a position right now where we're trying to increase our debt ceiling. The spending in the U.S. right now is quite large, and with a Republican and Democratic split Senate, and knowing that the House is being led by the Republicans and they are calling for a cut in spending, we knew that that was going to have an impact on the support we're providing Ukraine at this time. That definitely puts a little bit of a challenge to the level of support the U.S. can have. And so I know that the strategy was to look to see what was already on the ground and what was available that we already had in the region to provide that type of support. Furthermore, we also had quite a bit of a security challenge here in the U.S. as there were balloons floating across the United States, specifically in the northern regions near Canada, which is believed to be out from China, and trying to see what the security measures were with that and if there were cameras spying here in the U.S. So this has been a very interesting last 3 to 4 days, especially as it relates to foreign relations and security measures. So that was a major focal point for the U.S. security and the State Department over the last few days, which also further did not allow Secretary Blinken to go to China as was planned. He did have to cancel his visit.
Yeah, that's quite understandable, Maria. And I'm glad that you mentioned the issue of China as well as, what's going on in Ukraine. The President, Volodymyr Zelensky, also promising, support for Syria and for Turkey as well. We know that Ukraine has been far stretched, with this war. I mean, they've been calling for weapons for the past few weeks, especially as we move on closer to the first anniversary of this war, the Russian invasion. One wonders really how much of a support they can offer to Turkey at this time. But does the U.S. also wonder, with Ukraine offering this support, if some of that support might be coming, from the support it's also receiving from these other NATO allies, making use of its last resources to help another country while it still fights in the war?
Yes, I'm sure that would probably be very likely that the Republicans would bring up as they talk about cutting the spending for Ukraine. And as you mentioned, other NATO allies. But at this time, as we know, Ukraine is trying to establish itself as a sovereign nation. They're trying to establish itself to say that they are a viable player in the global world, whether it's foreign relations or whether it's the economy. And so as they work and fight for their sovereignty, I don't think that President Zelensky would have much other choice other than to provide his condolence and to say that he would provide support, which likely, as you said, will be coming from some of the support they're receiving from NATO allies and also the U.S. And so potentially there could be some combination of support efforts and collaboration, especially with the U.S. knowing that, as you said, the resources coming from the U.S. are much further than probably what Ukraine could provide, very much closer.
Usually with a crisis like these, Maria, you'd hear even other stronger voices in the United States, apart from President Biden. What about Kamala Harris, the vice president? You already mentioned Secretary of State Antony Blinken. What about the Speaker of the House of Representatives? These are people who in the past would have already said something, about the quake, would have even called on the government, probably provided some direction as to what sort of aid should be going to Turkey and to Syria at this time.
You'll likely see a message coming from the vice president. But as you said, we just saw a tweet coming from the president. I think that really what's happening at this time is we're seeing a lot of work being done on behalf of the White House and the State Department to try to make sure the resources are there and available. The Speaker of the House, at this time, I think that the focus is more on the spending the U.S. And so I think that would be a question as to what exactly he would say beyond sending his condolences. The minority leader of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, did speak out. He did put a statement out sending condolences, saying that he would support and have the Democrats of the House to support in any way they could, working with other NGOs and working with those who are in the region on the ground with humanitarian organizations. And so he has made a statement in that regard as well.
Thank you, Maria, for bringing us up to speed on this. We'll expect more response from the U.S. government. We understand the EU is also having a meeting, an emergency meeting, to discuss response to Turkey and Syria as to the earthquake. Just to remind our viewers, the epicenter of today's earthquakes were on the Turkish side of the border with Syria. But for many of the Syrians in the area, this natural disaster compounds 12 years of suffering and a civil war. Northwest of Syria was affected by this quake. It's home to both Syrian government forces and nearby rebel-held areas, just to give an understanding of this happening in the country. Stay with us. We have more coming up on The World Today Plus. It's the Grammys, and Album of the Year. We'll be looking at the winners and a very special someone from Nigeria who's the first female artist to make it to the list. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. Today's program really special because of the terrible 7.8 magnitude earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria. More than 2,000 people dead. There have been 2 aftershocks since that earthquake, which occurred earlier this morning while people were asleep. Rescue workers working through horrible conditions to try to get 2 survivors, possible survivors, under rubble. Remember, it's cold in the area. It's also rained in some parts. 10 cities affected in Turkey. Other cities also affected in Syria. About 5 countries affected by tremors. We have the VOA's Heather Murdoch, who's in Istanbul. Heather, great to see you, and thank you for joining us. Did you feel the impact of this quake in Istanbul?
No, not in Istanbul. I have friends that are as far away as Beirut or in Erbil in Iraq, that their entire houses were swaying and they had to evacuate. And that's quite far from the epicenter, but Istanbul is just a bit farther. The earthquake itself took place in the early morning in the Gaziantep province, and then the second one took place hours later, just 100 kilometers or a little less north of that. So it's quite a distance. As you know, Turkey is a huge country.
Yes, and we understand the weather is providing some discomfort and also hampering rescue services and emergency workers who are on the scene. How quickly do you think that they can move, considering how cold it is and the conditions they still have to work through to get to those survivors? There's a short period of time before they can still reach as many survivors as possible. Many people will be affected by the cold, or already are affected by the cold.
Yes, and time is running out, as you said. Early this morning, when we started, when I woke up, the death toll was in the hundreds. Now it's more than 2,300, and that's just in the span of, say, 12 hours. And there is no count to how many people are still missing. I spoke to some rescue workers, some aid workers today, and they said right now, everyone's focus is just working as fast as possible to save as many people as possible. And they don't know how many that is going to be, how many survivors they will find, and how many survivors they won't find, because the amount of people still trapped is very large and unknown. And a lot of the buildings that fell were buildings that really were never meant to withstand a shock like this, in areas that are populated with the largest per capita displaced families or refugee families in possibly the world. So there's a lot of poverty, plus the cold, plus the fact that, you know, there's just difficult weather to get to them is definitely hampering efforts to bring as many people home as live, but they are working as fast as they can.
There's also a limitation to how much equipment they can bring to the area, isn't there, Heather? Most of the rescue workers we're reading are using their hands to try to move rubble, with just someone using a shovel. But they also have to be careful, don't they? Because of, you know, moving debris and then them hurting even more people who are under the debris. How easy would this be for them? How more difficult could it be? Perhaps if it rains, I don't know. It's a race against time, as you say. This
is an issue that I spoke to the International Rescue Committee today, and this is an issue that they had brought up a few days ago, actually, of course, not knowing there'd be an earthquake, to warn the international community that there's a a crisis coming. It's already very cold in Turkey, and there's expected to be harsh winter weather, specifically in southern Turkey and northern Syria, which has been impacted by war for 12 years, and much of it is quite isolated and still at war. So this harsh weather is supposed to come through very soon in the next couple of days, and we don't know if rescue workers will be able to continue their work through it, or if at some point the rescue will become recovery because of it.
Indeed, Heather, thank you again for your reporting on this. We'll be reaching out to you for more updates, I'm sure, as there will be as the evening progresses.
Thank you.
Let's just make a switch now to updates on the situation in Ukraine. Fierce battles raging in the eastern Donetsk region as Russia intensifies pressure before the first anniversary of its invasion of the country. That's according to President Volodymyr Zelensky. He says it's very tough in the Donetsk region, fierce battles in his nightly video. But he says no matter what, how difficult it is, how strong the pressure is, we have to endure. We have no other alternative but to defend ourselves and to win. Russia, he says, is applying increased pressure to make up for its defeats last year. We see that on various sectors of the front, and also pressure in terms of information. He also spoke about Ukraine's lobbying for a ban of Russian athletes from the Olympics, saying representatives of a terrorist state should have no place at the Olympics and the international tournaments. There's been a huge movement of those Leopard 2A tanks for training purposes heading towards Ukraine. They were moving from Hungary, one of the locations, one of the countries which has also promised help to Ukraine. A government spokesperson said that the moves in the stance with the government are unchanged. It's not participating in training Ukrainian soldiers. It's just shipping the weapons all the way to Ukraine. Hungary shares a border with Ukraine in the east. It's a member of NATO. Prime Minister Viktor Orban says Hungary has chosen to remain neutral and wants to stay out of the war. He also repeatedly criticized European Union sanctions on Russia, saying that they fail to weaken Moscow meaningfully while they risk destroying the European economy. I want to bring in a Russian expert, Professor Dyson. He joins me now. Professor Glenn Dyson is in Oslo. Thank you, Professor, for your patience. We've just been following the major breaking news here from Nigeria, out of Turkey, of course, the earthquake that happened in the country. But with the war in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky promising support to Turkey and to Syria. How much of a support do you think he can offer, seeing that he's been fighting the war for almost 11 months now? I think you need to unmute, Professor. And, well, Professor Dyson, okay, we do think we may have, we'll get back to him, I guess. But speaking of those Leopard 2 tanks, Canada is donating some of them to Ukrainian forces. They've arrived in Poland already. The Defense Minister in Canada, Anita Anand, announced this on Twitter on Sunday. A post followed a tank, was accompanied by a photo of a tank rolling out of the belly of a plane. Alongside our allies, she says, we'll soon be training the armed forces of Ukraine in the use of this equipment. Ukraine officials suspect that Russia is preparing a large-scale bombardment as the first year of its invasion nears. The situation on the front lines is getting tougher, as President Zelensky has been saying. Russia is throwing more and more troops into battle. They believe the strike could reach the country's major cities, including the capital, Kyiv. Attacks will be accompanied by Canadian Armed Forces members to train Ukrainian soldiers on their use. Unfortunately, we couldn't take Professor Glenn Dyson. We'll try to reach out to him again. But as we end the program, It's a Grammy season, of course. Pop star Beyonce broke the record for most career wins at Music Grammys Awards on Sundays, but she lost again in the prestigious Album of the Year category, this time to British singer Harry Styles. Beyonce added 4 Grammys to her collection, bringing her lifetime total to 32 and surpassing the tally of late classical conductor George Solti. Despite her success through the years, she has never claimed the Best Album trophy. She says she took home the honor on Sunday for Harry's house. Backstage, Beyonce took pictures as she secured the all-time Grammy record with her award for Best Dance Electronic Album for Renaissance. Well, here in Nigeria, female R&B singer Thames was also a winner in the Grammys. She winning a Grammy for contributing to songwriting for a few of those stars who won last night. And that'll be all on The World Today. Thanks for watching. We'll have updates on the earthquake in Turkey and in Syria in our upcoming bulletins. Well, do stay with us for those updates, as well as other developing stories. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you later.